Hi, welcome to the webinar How to Tell if Your Child Has Speech and Language Difficulties. My name's Alice and I'm a children's speech and language therapist. I've been working for the past 7 or so years mainly with primary school age children, although I also work with secondary school age children and young people and preschoolers. So you can see that my day job is very varied, always interesting. But today I'm going to be talking to you about how to tell if your child has speech and language difficulties. It's one of the most common queries, questions I get from teachers and parents. They say that they know if a child has really significant speech, language or communication difficulties, but when a child is on those borderlines, maybe they're having some difficulties with their communication skills, but they're not sure quite whether it's just part of their normal development of communication or whether there's something a little bit more going on that would need a referral to speech and language therapy services. It's those borderlines that are a bit more tricky for people to judge. So today we're going to be talking about that, is some key signs to look out for that suggests the child might be having speech or language difficulties and might need a little bit more help or an assessment by a speech and language therapist to support with their communication skill development. So speech, language and communication needs is a really broad area. We work with children with social communication difficulties, maybe they've also got a diagnosis of autism. We work with people who have difficulties with talking in different environments, so maybe they have selective mutism. We work with people who stutter. We work with people who have eating and drinking difficulties. So a huge wide range, and to keep today's webinar to around the half-hour mark, I'm just going to be talking about speech and language difficulties today. But if you do have concerns about a child or a young person's communication skills in any of those areas that I have just mentioned, please don't turn off today's webinar and think, oh okay, I don't need to do anything then. There's plenty of advice out there. On the Iris Speaks website there are blogs, or you could have a consultation. There's there's charities who have really useful websites with lots of information about all of those areas I've just mentioned. Or you could speak to your child's preschool setting and school, or your local speech and language therapy service. So if you've got concerns about their social skills development or stuttering or definite eating and drinking, do go off and look for extra help and support for those areas. But today we'll take a look at speech and language development. When a speech and language therapist is talking about speech, we're talking about the way that someone moves their mouth to make the precise movements needed to make the individual speech sounds, and also the way those speech sounds are put together in words and sentences. So quite a complex skill that we're requiring our children to master by the time they start using words. And these skills develop gradually, like all communication skills, and they develop at different rates for different children. There is individual variation there, but the research has shown that there are sort of typical sounds that are required earlier than others. So, for example, and b are some of the first speech sounds to be developed. And then you gradually learn more and more speech sounds until entering the school years. You might still be tidying up some of those more tricky sounds like r and. So you can take a look. There are norms for typical development out there. The Iris Speaks speech email course contains a table which has the different ages and the speech sounds which you might normally expect to be developing around those ages. It is a guideline, but it could be quite useful. For example, if you're wondering if your 3-year-old should be producing the sh sound yet because they're saying shoe as Sue, you can take a look and it might just reassure you that actually that sh sound, you wouldn't normally expect a 3-year-old to be able to produce it, although some might be able to. So take a look at that, and that can help you understand which sounds are normally being learnt at which kind of ages. And children's speech will get clearer as they get older. You'll find that for very little children, you might be one of the few people that can understand them, and maybe you're having to translate a little bit for, say, if you meet a friend of a friend on the high street and they're talking to your child, they might not understand every word they're saying, and you might need to do a bit of translation, because you all know that when they're saying we bought shoes, they mean shoes. But if you find that you can't understand your own child talking quite a lot of the time, particularly if they're talking in a couple of word sentences and phrases, and you're having to get them to repeat lots of times because their speech is unclear and you can't understand their speech sounds, then that's a bit of a cause for concern, because parents are often the best people at tuning in to their child. They get used to their speech substitutions and the sounds that your child can and can't make. But if you're having to work really hard to understand what your child's saying, that's probably getting quite frustrating for both of you, and it's a sign that your child might need a bit of extra help to learn those speech sounds and to get them clear enough so that you can understand. Also, if you find that your child has only a small range of speech sounds, say a small range of consonants, might be only 3 or 4 different consonants around the age of 3, so if they're only using a m, b, and p, for example, then that's another sign that they might find it hard to learn a wide range of speech sounds. Something you might notice is that the same word is used for lots of different things. So maybe they say cheese as B, but also me is B, and tree is B, and 3 is B. So all of those words are all being produced in the same way. That can be a bit of a sign that your child has only a small number of speech sounds that they can use in their talking. And that can be another sign that they might benefit from a bit of support from a speech and language therapist. Also, if you find that your child has difficulty saying their vowel sounds, that's not as typical. So if they are saying vowels in slightly different ways, so maybe instead of car they're saying more of a k or care when they're playing with their toy cars, then, or if it sounds like they're groping and their mouth is really trying to find that R sound, so it's sort of a ka, and it takes them a while to find it, then those can be signs again that they might need a bit of extra help with their talking. A last thing to look out with speech is if your child regularly changes the way they say the same word. So let's pretend you're playing with your toy cars with your child again, and you notice that they're saying the word car in 4 or 5 different ways. Maybe even in that same play session they're saying it's a car, and then the next thing it's a tar, and then maybe they're saying it's a da or a cur, and you think actually they've just said that same word in lots of different ways. That can be another sign that their speech sounds need a bit of extra support to get them consistently saying the same word in the same way. So if you've spotted any of those difficulties with their speech, what should you do about it? The first thing that we'd advise is to get your child's hearing checked. So even if you think that their hearing is absolutely fine, children can be quite good at masking whether or not they're hearing, either through following all the other different clues in their environment, so noticing what you're looking at or what you're pointing at and using that to help them understand. So it's really good to get your child's hearing checked. If they can't hear the sounds within words clearly, then it makes sense that they won't be able to produce those same sounds. Really good idea to get your child's hearing checked. It's also one of the things that if you then do put in a referral to your speech and language therapy service, then they will ask whether you've had your child's hearing checked. So it's good to be able to tick that box and say yes. Probably the most important piece of advice I'm going to give you today is equally applicable for working on both speech and language with children. And it's to focus on what your child is saying rather than how they're saying it. we want communication and interaction to be a really fun, enjoyable thing for both you and your child. So you can imagine the frustration if your child has just been out for a lovely trip out with your partner maybe. They come running back into the house and say, "Oh, I went bark." If you then turn around and say, "You went bark? How funny. I think you mean you went to the park." That starts with a p sound. Even though you're really well intentioned, you want them to develop their speech sounds, your child's going to take that as, "Oh, I tried to talk about the park and what I got was a speech and language therapy lesson instead." And they've also just heard one example. "Oh, you went bark, how funny." One bad example of how to say the word park. You mean park with a p. One good example. So it's sort of 50-50 on what they're hearing there, which will help them. If instead you model back what they've said, so you show that you've listened, you show that you're interested. "Wow, you went to the park, that's fun." There's one good example of how to say the word park there already. They've heard the word park with a nice clear p sound. "Wow, you went to the park. I love the park." Again, another clear example. "What did you do at the park?" If you say those things instead, they've heard 3 good examples of how to say the word park. You've kept on the topic of park, which means they're going to be much more excited and involved in talking with you because they wanted to talk about the park. And it's going to help them much more when they're trying to think of that word park, because they'll associate it with chatting with mum and having a lovely time talking about the park. If you then keep on going in that conversation, using that word park a few more times than you might normally. So if you're talking about, "Oh, you went on the swings," you can say, "Oh, you went on the swings at the park. My favourite thing at the park is the roundabout." So you're still providing a few more examples than you might do just naturally if you were just chatting away. But the emphasis is on the conversation and the having fun together rather than just on saying, "Don't say bark, say park." The last thing that you can do if you've got, there's a speech sound that you think you've taken a look at the table and your child would normally be able to say it by this age, maybe they're starting to use it in a couple of different words and you just want to boost their speech skills a bit, then something you can do at home just for fun is some listening games, and they will help your child tune into those speech sounds in different words. And super simple, you can either play the classic I spy with my little eye, something beginning with k, say, if it's the k sound that you'd like your child to be using and that they can use in some words, but using different words that they haven't got their k in yet. So you might choose cupboard, or you might choose coat. You could also go around the house going on a k treasure hunt, trying to find things beginning with k. So it might be that you go around and you find a key on the side and then you say, "Oh, I found something beginning with k. It's the key. I found the key." Or you could even collect those things beforehand and put them in a feelie bag. I love doing this with particularly younger children. Then take turns putting their hand in and bring something out of the bag, like, "Oh, I found a cat. I found a cat. It's a cat." And the important thing here is that these games are all listening games. So you're the one doing the talking, you're providing lots of clear examples of that k sound in word, cat, key. But if your child wants to say silent throughout the activity and not say the words, that's fine. The emphasis is really on them hearing lots of examples of that sound in words. So some fun things you can do to work on some of those speech sounds, but the really important thing is some nice clear modelling back. Now, let's move on to talking about language now. When we think about language, there are 2 areas. There's understanding of spoken language and there's use of spoken language. So what does your child understand and what kind of things do they say, their words and their sentences? And important to look at both of those 2 areas when we're looking at children's language skill development. There's a gradual progression in a child's understanding of spoken language, just like there is in their speech development. So children go from understanding single words through to understanding short phrases, through to being able to listen and understand a whole story and be able to answer questions and talk about it. So if you find that your child around the age 2, we'd expect them to be able to understand sentences with 1 to 2 key bits of information at least. And if you find they're not understanding those single word requests, age 2, then it would be a good idea to seek some extra advice and support with that. A single word request, let's just have a think about what that is. So if you're there playing with your child and you've got maybe a teddy bear, a ball and a book in front of them, and their attention is fully focused, they're listening, they're playing with you. If you say to them, "Where's the bear?" or "Give me the bear," that's a single word request because they've got just one key word in there, bear, or you could call it teddy, whatever you call it with your child. They've got that one single word that they have to be able to understand to follow that instruction. They've got a few objects to choose between, so they've got the ball and the book as well, but you've just asked for the bear. That's quite important that they've got those choices there, because if it was just you and your child and a teddy bear with you and you said, "Where's the bear?" they would automatically go for the bear anyway, because that's the one toy, and adults do normally talk about toys with their children. So if they can't understand those simple single word requests around age 2, then good idea to seek a bit of support. If around age 3 you ask those kind of questions and they're echoing back questions instead of trying to answer in some way, then that's another sign that they might have some communication needs that would warrant a little bit further investigation and looking into. So that could be echoing, like if you say, maybe you're getting ready for school and you say, "Where's your shoes?" and they say, "Where's your shoes?" back to you. Or if you're saying, "Oh, what's that?" when you're looking out the window at something and they say, "What's that?" rather than trying to answer or pointing to what you're looking at or picking up something, then that echoing is something that children do if they're not understanding quite as much. So that's another thing to look out for. If you find that you are needing to repeat your questions or instructions lots of times, or you're needing to make them simpler for your child, then that's a sign that they might need a bit of extra help. Go and take a look at the language course. The Iris Speaks language email course provides some really good information on how to make instructions that bit simpler or make them a bit trickier, so that you can see whether your child's understanding them by either adding extra key bits of information. So it's a good idea to play a few of those games with your child and see where your child might be at. But if you find that on a day-to-day basis you're having to repeat lots of times and you're having to make things much simpler, then that can be a sign that they're not understanding. But it's also something that you can do to help. So repeating instructions is a very useful strategy. Another really useful strategy is to give your child thinking time. So, for example, I'm giving you lots of verbal information now. You'll probably turn off this webinar at the end and need some time to have a think about it all before you can fully process it. Exactly the same for children. When we're giving them instructions, particularly if you're asking a question that needs an answer, you need time to fully understand the language. Then you need time to either remember what it was you did, if it's "what did you do at school today" that's the question, or to think of your answer. And then you need to be able to put your answer into words and sentences to actually say it back. So there's lots of complex processes that have to go on for a child to answer a question. So as adults, if we ask the question and then count to 5 or even 10 in your head afterwards, so "What did you do at school today?" Before expecting an answer or repeating your question again. So, did you play in the art corner or did you play outside? That's a way I might simplify it if they can't answer. But before repeating your question or simplifying it for the child, giving them that thinking time so they've got time to come up with a response. It's a really useful strategy. The other thing that you can do to help your child is use lots of your natural gesture, pointing, looking, showing, all really useful things. So, for example, if you're asking your child what they want to drink, doing the drink sign if they're a little child, And then if it's a choice between milk and juice, getting those two things out of the fridge and saying, do you want some milk or do you want some juice? So that they can point or look or copy your words and join in and understand in that situation. They've got lots of visuals to help them out with their understanding. And just like I said with the speech course, a hearing check. So one of the key reasons that a child might not be understanding your language is if they can't hear it, or if they're hearing only a couple of the words in the sentence because they've got fluctuating hearing. So always worth getting a hearing check as well. Now, if your child can understand your language, the next thing to take a look at is whether they are using their spoken language in the ways we might expect. But from a very, very little child, there are still some things we can look out for, even before they're before their first words. So around age 1, we'd still expect a child or older baby to be attempting to communicate, even without words. So are they starting to point? Are they starting to vocalise when they're pointing at something they like ah, ah? If they can see something over there they like, so they're trying to get your attention. Are they bringing you things to show you that they want, or that they want some help with? Maybe they're bringing over a toy box that they want you to open for them, or maybe they're attempting to start some play with you by bringing a toy that they like to play with. So that's all really good early communication, and we would want our children, definitely by the age of 1 to 2, they should be attempting to communicate with either those non-verbal methods or starting to use some words. And if they don't do that, specifically the pointing and indicating choices with motivating things, then that's a good time to seek a bit of advice and support. And then as your child starts to get a little bit older and starts learning words, we'd expect their vocabulary to keep steadily growing until they get to at least 50 words age 2. If they've got fewer than 50 words age 2, that's another thing that we look out for to see whether they need a bit of help with their language skill development. And if you feel at any point that your child's language skills have stopped completely or even moved backwards, then again that's a bit of a sign they might need some help, and it's a good idea to talk to others, maybe talk to your GP to get a little bit of help and support and assessment in place so that we can see what might be happening with their communication development. And then your child's language skills will continue to grow gradually into 2-word phrases, 3-word phrases, short sentences, and again we're expecting that nice gradual progression. So a case in point, if your child has maybe only 2-word phrases but they're age 3 to 4, that's behind where we might expect them to be for their age. So we would want to take a look at whether we can help with their communication skill development. They might be one for us. Similarly, at around 4 to 5, when they're just starting school, they should have at least those 3-word phrases. Otherwise, you might want to seek help. Modelling is another really good thing to do here, which we're going to talk about now. So modelling, just like with the speech development, where you're repeating back what you want your child to be able to say eventually. You're not asking them to repeat it, but you're just modelling, giving a really good example of the communication skill that you would like to see. The same thing you can do with your child. So with a very little child, it might be you're playing with them on the floor and they're coming up with 1 or 2-word phrases. Maybe they're saying car, car. You think, okay, that's 1 word, that's great. I'm going to model back some 2-word phrases. So I'll say, it's a big car, or the man's in the car, or fast car, anything you think that's 2 words that will really grab your child's attention. If they're using the 2-word phrases, so maybe they're saying man car, you can say the man is driving the car. So you've built it up to 3 key bits of information: man, driving, car. You've added a nice action word there, which is a really good thing for your child to be learning. But you've also kept your sentences grammatical. So the man is driving the car. Don't miss out those little grammatical words just because your child's not using them yet. It's good for them to hear them. Slightly older children, maybe you're looking at a book together. I like these big picture books to look at with children. And your child is saying pan on head. and you say, oh, yes, the boy has got a pan on his head. The boy's got a pan on his head. So you're still acknowledging what they're saying. You're not correcting them, saying, oh, who's got a pan on his head? The boy. But you are giving that child or your child the whole sentence. So the boy has a pan on his head rather than just the little bit that they use. So you're giving them that really nice example of the language that you would like them to start using when they're ready. And that's really the aim of modelling, is to show that next little step on to your child. Adults, when we talk, we use really long sentences, and it's so far away from what the child will be able to say, particularly when they're just setting out on their language development. So there's a big gap between the language they're hearing and the language they can use. So by taking where they're at and focusing on what they're talking about, what they're interested in, with the kind of language they're using, but just adding one or two extra words, or just adding those little grammatical bits in, it shows them the next steps of language development really nicely and clearly. Key thing there as well is that you're focusing on what they're talking about, so they're going to remain interested and listening to what you're saying. So all of these strategies will definitely help if you've got concerns about your child's speech or language skills, and hopefully they're something that you can get going with straight away. But the really important message is that if you have concerns about your child's speech or language development, then you are the person who knows your child best. You're the person who will spend the most amount of time listening and talking with them, and will have seen that progress throughout their childhood. So you've got a lot of information there already, and if you are concerned, then it's always worth talking to someone about those concerns. You can put some of these things in place maybe whilst you're waiting for a speech and language therapy assessment by your local service, or before you go to the GP, so you've got some information about exactly where you feel they're up to. But there's lots of places you can go to get a little bit of extra help in the initial stages. Get that hearing test, go talk to your GP. Really useful to talk to your child's education setting as well, so either their preschool setting or their school setting, so you can find out what their thoughts are about your child's communication development. They can often put it in the context of what other children at the same age are doing as well, to help you sort of understand what typical development can be like at your child's age. You could also speak to your local speech and language therapy service, or you could have an Iris Speaks consultation to just talk through your initial concerns. So if you do have concerns, you're not alone. There's lots of places you can go to help, but there's also all of those things that you can start doing straight away. So good luck!